my friends, and welcome once more to the Lair of Omnisci. I am Omnisci, and this is another Worlds Their Way, where I read the narrative bits of a role-playing game, often the example of how a game session might go, to introduce you to a game from my past or my collection, to entertain you, and also to kind of show you how these games were envisioned to be played by the creators. This is going to be a little bit different, though. In this way, I'm going to read you a short story out of this game because this particular game distributes its narration throughout the manual. Whenever it introduces a new concept, it introduces a short story snippet and describes the mechanics on how to resolve the situation in crisis. The game for today is Shadowrun First Edition. Now, this is a game that is very much at the heart of what a lot of people think of in cyberpunk. It's not pure cyberpunk, though. This element of magic is threaded throughout it in its alternate history. The Seattle of the year 2050 is much different from our Seattle, even though we're only 30 years away from that. Magic has restructured the world, starting, a bit back. There's been quite a divergence since. So even though we have technology today that is truly amazing, it's nothing compared to what's in store for us according to this book as far as body augmentations and things like that. But this that I'm going to read you is called Night on the Town, and it's a short story that's designed to introduce you to the world itself of Shadowrun. And rather than break it up with snippets of gameplay, try to imagine, if you will, that this is actually just narrated gameplay of a Shadowrun that is taking place before you. So, this is Night on the Town. Shadowrun. Noun. Any movement, action, or series of such made in carrying out plans which are illegal or quasi-legal. From Worldwide World Watch 2050 Update. Ghost walked into Club Penumbra and let the beat fill him. His head began to bob with a cardiac pulse, and he felt the feathers tucked into his hachimaki slide across his rain-slicked neck. He wished he wasn't hunting business. Drops of water flew from the rampant ends of his frizz as he shook himself free of the music's spell. The entryway was dark after the glow of the city streets, even with the shine of the wall-sized trid screen. A figure, full and feminine, shifted into his way. He tensed, then caught the gleam of the fiber optic line running from the box in her belt to her head, and he suppressed the urge to reach for his weapon. No danger here. She was a deckhead, her eyes turned inward into the SimSense world, filling her skull through the porcelain tipped jack behind her ear. Lost in her head, she never felt the brush of his casual caress as he stepped past her onto the floor. So, we know a couple of things already. First of all, Ghost is kind of an eclectic figure. He's wearing a hachimaki, which is to the best of my understanding, a Japanese head dress thing, kind of like a wig. And it's raining. Well, it's Seattle, so that hasn't changed. The outside streets are full of neon, which is kind of a consistent theme of cyberpunk. It's all very neon and black. The dichotomy between the two serving to accentuate both. And again, too, you have a world that is rich with music and driving beat. That sense of punk and music are often intertwined. You have your introduction to possibly the dark side of cyberpunk, where a person is lost inside of the electronic reality that's inside their head. That is, again, another figment that will enter into this game experience and into the world itself. How does that change the world if you could just plug into a box and be living in the world of your choosing? That's a world that some people would choose to never leave again, and that actually comes up in the game too. The penumbra was crowded for so early in the night. Ghost threaded his way between the gyrating bodies on the dance floor, avoiding all contact with the frenetic revelers. His war paint hardly looked out of place, but his broad Amerindian features marked him as an outsider among the mostly Anglo and Asian crowd. It didn't bother him. Those few who met his eyes returned wary, almost fearful stares. That was fine. He felt tough and ready. Their reactions only confirmed it. Okay, so we have this eclectic culture blending. Anglo, well, Caucasian, and Asian. It's a fusion on the west coast of what was the United States. So yes, it's natural for those two cultures to meet. And on top of that, he's of American Indian descent. So, he's not seen as, he is an outsider to their culture by his nationality as well as his choice of lifestyle. Also, he's wearing war paint. That would seem very out of place in our society. How has society changed where a person walking around in American Indian war paint on the streets doesn't seem that strange? Again, the odd, the different, only serves to describe the cultural differences. He found her sitting in the back of the room, her stool rocked up onto its hind legs. The angle made her fringed deer leather duster, unfastened in the close heat of the club, fall away from her shoulders to reveal an expanse of fair flesh. Her fine, regular features were relaxed, green eyes hooded under languid lids. One leg rested on the table edge, and she toyed with the feathers decorating the top of her knee-high boot. She made an inviting picture, all allure, until you saw the weapon belts crossing her cut-off jeans just above the crotch. The sculpted grip of her Remington room sweeper, snugged into the holster at her right hip, was barely visible in the shadows. Her intricately hilted mage sword hung scabbarded on her left, nestled into the fold in her coat, a sharp edge to the image. All right, she's got a shotgun on one side, she's got a mage sword on the other, so she's a mage. She's lightly clothed. That, again, often is a stylistic choice in more cyberpunk. If you are chromed, that's often to show off your enhancements. If you have, cybernetic replacements and things. If you don't, that's possibly a sign of how brave you are, or, possibly a sign that she uses her beauty to put people off their game, or, advertise wares, or maybe she just enjoys dressing that way. Whatever. But it's her style. And a duster. And again, a callback to, kind of a Western theme where everything is kind of out and permissible. It's kind of a new West in its own way. That is, if the Shadowrunners got away with everything, which they don't always do. A dark-haired stranger eclipsed his view. Ghost had seen the type before. A line and a fast smile showing perfect corporate teeth to hide the tension in his body as he tried to hustle what he thought was a pretty piece of tough street meat. The suit had his courage up. With another glass of it in his hand, he was making his move, secure in the knowledge that his corp would protect a good little Sarari man like himself. Now we start to see some of the terminology thrown in. We already are, aware that Ghost is dressed in a variety of clothes that are not typical what we'd think of as Western wear. But now this guy is a corporate agent. A Sarari man, we understand, it's a take on the salaried man, a person who is owned basically by the corporation he works for. And again, that's something that is threaded throughout reality of Seattle 2050, is this corp and its agents are everywhere, because the common assumption is that almost everybody works for the corp, but if you don't, you're an outsider. Cue the Shadowrunners. A shift in the suit's stance let Ghost catch a glimpse of the woman's face. Her eyes now sparkled coldly behind a rigid, indifferent mask. The slumming Sarari man was looking for a dangeroso thrill, and he blathered on, unaware how close he was to an unexpected return on his investment. Her slim fingers twisted in a negligent gesture, chromed nails glinting in a flash of neon from the stage. Then she whispered something that Ghost doubted he would have heard even if the room were silent. Blinded to his actions by his own desires, the suit never saw the liquid rise from his glass and fling itself onto the pale gray denim of his Jedi Cal jeans. Okay, it's not just enough to say she used magic to levitate his drink and throw it on him. Again, it's all about her style and how she did it. She just kind of wiggled her fingers, muttered something, and pulled off this effect with a minimum of effort, not being uncool for a moment, being her own style. And of course, they're also going to talk about how he's got designer genes. Not something we know. Jedi Cal sounds cool, though. Certainly. Shadowrun is all about style. If you don't have the style, if you just run it very mechanically, and the Remington Runesweeper is just a shotgun, and a sword is just a sword, you know, you lose a lot of what this game is about. Smiling, Ghost stepped up behind the sputtering Sorariman. Buzz, chummer. The man spun, eyes widening with fear and showing Ghost his own reflection in the man's gold-irised Zeiss eyes. Though Ghost's ragged street grin was distorted by the curve of the lenses, it carried his feral mood anyway. The man backed away, wet spot growing on his jeans. He stumbled into a passing reveler who shoved him hard, but without real rancor. Rubbing a bruised arm, the man disappeared into the crowd. Ghost turned his attention to the woman he had come to see. So, Zeiss Eyes. Zeiss is actually a company that makes eyewear. So he's got eyes that are made by Zeiss. Cyber eyes. Cool. Gold iris, very expensive probably, so that seems to fit a man without a lot of substance, but with money and influence in the corp on his side. Hoy, Sally. What's happening? She gave him a knowing little smile that always annoyed Ghost and tapped the stool at her side. You've heard, or you wouldn't have come uptown. Any trouble crossing Ancients' territory? He shrugged as he sat. Naw, them elves is still lying low after their last tumble with the tigers. He waved off the approaching barmaid who favored him with a sour look. I heard you had a Shadowrun cooking. I ain't heard anything about how hot the oven is. All right, so we're talking about the entry point of a Shadowrun. Ghost is a free agent moving to somebody that he's familiar with. Also, as he's not buying drinks, barmaids don't like that. But kind of what happens when your bar is a place for Shadowrunners to hook up together to form a team for a Shadowrun. And the Ancients are a gang of elves, actually, which is kind of interesting. And you have to sometimes pass through different gang territories, so she's just wondering, and she knows where his home turf is. She knows he had to pass through the Ancients, and yeah, that's a little bit of the news of what's happening. It's a fluid situation, so Ghost is going to be apprised of that. If it were easy, I wouldn't need you. Her compliment pleased him, but Ghost kept his face straight. This was still business. Tricky, is it? Not really, but I want a good gun at my back. That was a warning light. When Sally wanted muscle and guns, she was expecting trouble. Who's the mark? Mitsuhama, she whispered. MCT? No wonder you want a good gun. She gave him a nod, looking slightly apologetic. I owe somebody. This is the way they want to be repaid. You must have a hell of a debt. Not really. This runs a simple snatch and grab on some data. My somebody is just a little short on allocable resources at the moment. If that's all, what do you need a samurai for? I suppose I don't, she said softly, reaching across to rest a hand on his arm. But I'm feeling something odd about this one. It's making me nervous. So I want some quality backup, Ghost Who Walks Inside. So his full name is Ghost Who Walks Inside. Again, the Amerindian side of him. And they're talking. He's poking. He's asking questions, which is something Shadowrunners should really do. Trying to find out exactly how hot the oven is. How dangerous is this run that you want us to do? And he understands, because she's giving him subtle tells, that it's possibly very dangerous. So he's confident in his own skill, but he doesn't want to go on a suicide mission. Good's a reward if you're not around to spend it, right? He snorted. She always knew how to get him. You still need a good decker. Got one. To his raised eyebrow, she continued. Dodger. That was a surprise. If the Dodger's in, the haul must be worthwhile. But even he is not going to get through their ice. Says who? Ghost turned casually, recognizing the voice. The booming bass drum impression that the band Sasquatch was belting out had drowned the approach of the tall, slim man in black leathers. No, not man. Elf. The new arrival's delicately pointed ears showed plainly against the depilated side of his head, and his data jack ports gleamed with a bright silver in the flashes of strobe from the dance floor. So the Dodger is a Decker. So he is chromed. He has data implants in the side of his head, and that all the hair has been removed so that he can easily get at his jacks. And it shows that he has them. These are not out of the ordinary. Lots of people have these jacks. Some people have them for work. He just happens to have jacks that he would plug into the side of his head so that he can do his work, which is running into the Matrix using his cyberdeck. So we'll discuss that in a second. Sneaking up like that ain't healthy, Dodger, Ghost warned. The elf shrugged away the implied threat. The ice will not concern us, sweet Lady Sung. I have the key that will unlock the castle gates. He held up a slim plastic rod for her to see. Where'd you get that? Conjured it, he suggested. To her disbelieving face, he added, a cautious person takes care of his sources, Lady Fair. Ghost was surprised at Sally's breach of business etiquette. In inquiring after Dodger's source, she must be worried. He wanted to know too, but he had his own standards to live up to. Still, he needed to know what was going on. Excuse me, you two. What's the stick, and how's it going to help us? Dodger gave Ghost the look that left no doubt that the elf considered him a moron. Very simple, Sir Razor Guy. This is the security key to a Mitsuhama monitor station. With this, we can open the can and get at the station. From there, I can jack directly into their mainframe, safely inside their intrusion countermeasures. They've still got to have protection. Of course, but that will be no problem. I am the Dodger, after all. Ghost and Sally exchanged knowing glances. Dodger was good, all right, but only a Decker would be so sure of himself. Have faith, my companions. We shall run through the shadows unseen by the corporate guard dogs and escape with the swag. The elf leaned forward in a conspiratorial fashion. But we must be quick, for my magic key fades to dross at midnight. Ghost called the time function into his retinal display. 10:42:33 PST. That didn't leave much time. Who else we waiting on, Sally? Who else do we need? She said with a grin, shoving away from the wall. Let's do 'em. Ghost matched her grin. He liked her style. Now we come to the run. But that's the introduction. Again, you come to a run, you set up the situation, you establish what the actual parameters are, you know who's involved, get as much information as you can, and then go forward into it. We're introduced to a mage with a little display of magical powers. We're introduced to a straight samurai, that's Ghost, and his style. And we're introduced to a Decker, who may not have big guns and everything, but he can be very powerful and influential in his own way, and we're about to see that. The rain had stopped, and the streets were filling up as the trio left Club Penumbra. Dodger had put his Yamaha rapier in the rack next to Ghost's own Harley. The elf's bike looked slim and fragile next to the big combat hog. Despite Dodger's objections, Ghost insisted on checking out the bike and fiddling with its systems. By the time he was satisfied with its response, Sally had pulled up on her red and silver custom-fitted rapier, and the elf shut up. They roared away from the club in a cloud of petrochem smoke. Remember, little details are important in running this kind of a story. They're not just on motorcycles. Of course, as a street samurai, Ghost is going to have a big Harley that can take some punishment. It's big and it's loud and it's powerful. For Sally and Dodger, a slim Yamaha, a sport bike, is more their style. And it's quieter, it's quicker, And it can't take the kind of beating that the Harley can, but it's got their sense of style and aesthetic. They had a few tense moments when they ran into some toughs on Trog turf, but the orcs didn't push it. Just outside the part of town the big corps called their own, they found a nice, quiet alley. A certified cred stick with a 200 new yen balance and a bottle of old red-eye brought a squatter's assurance that he'd hit the panic button if anyone molested the bikes. The promise wasn't worth much, but the bribe would likely keep the alley's residents away from the machines. It's a way of life. You have to keep watching your assets. If you can't be there, you've got to have some means of protecting them. In this case, we're introduced to the money, new yen, different from cash that we understand. A cred stick is basically money, as in cash on hand. Bottle of old red-eye, universal symbol of bribing someone with booze. So, they're about to leave their bikes and go on the run. And the panic button, yeah, you hit that and the cops are called. Then they were off, moving through the shadows of the corporate streets. There were no crowds here, just empty, clean streets, full of corporate pride and roving corporate security patrols. The big boys didn't like trouble on their turf. All of a sudden, they don't have to worry about gangs. The Trogs are an orc street gang. Again, they stick only to their specific race. And, yeah, they're a violent group, but they managed to get away from them. It took them a cautious hour to reach the goal, a dark, dank alley in back of Mitsuhama's downtown offices. Halfway down the puddled lane, flanked by hollows in the smooth concrete, was the black macroplast tower that shielded the station. They saw it. The monitor station, back out of sight of the upper-class types, was for the convenience of Mitsuhama's security goons, letting them report to their bosses or check out any data or system updates. The key was the only way past the casing that protected the terminal. The black macroplast was proof against anything sort of an anti-tank warhead. Yeah, you can get those in the game. And anybody trying that way would destroy the terminal beneath the armor. Dodger produced the key stick and held it poised above the slot. Your assessment, Lady Fair? Sally closed her eyes and rocked her head back, turning it slowly from side to side. Ghost knew what she was doing, but his shoulder muscles still twitched. No matter how many times he saw her do it, Sally's astral scanning still rattled him. Another advantage of mages, they have hidden sight, astral scanning, to check and see if there's any kind of magical security that they're going to have to watch out for. A good corporation will invest in security on all sorts. ICE, intrusion countermeasures, is software to stop Deckers from doing what Dodger's about to try to do. Also, they have spirits that watch their areas, and sometimes wage mages, corporate wizards that look out for people who are trying to break in magically. So Sally is checking the magic side. All clear, she announced. Do it. Dodger slipped the black rod into the station's key slot. For a few long seconds, nothing happened. Ghost wondered if Dodger's source had sold him a dud, or worse, a screamer that would call down the corporate heat while they waited. His eyes roved the alley, which seemed to contain no one else but his companions and the local rats. Sally was nervous, too. She slid her Remington out of its holster and ran the tip of her tongue tentatively along her upper lip. A soft hum rose from behind the macroplast, bringing a smile to Dodger's lips. As the panel slid up, Ghost felt Sally relax. A soft pop caught Ghost's attention. He snatched a glance at the source of the sound. 3 shiny prongs stretched claw-like out of the back of Dodger's hand. The elf snugged them into slots in the Mitsuhama monitor station, then rocked his hand back. The silvered cones remained in the terminal, but cables as fine as fairy thread ran from them to the receptacles in Dodger's hand. So ka, Ghost whispered to himself in understanding. So ka means I understand in Japanese, and he is plugging into the matrix this way. The prongs were program carriers. The chips the elf had inserted into the station would allow him to run the matrix as soon as he jacked in through his data jack. It wasn't as safe as using a proper cyberdeck, but carrying one here wouldn't have been safe either. There was no way to explain to a corp cop why you had a deck on their turf. Deckers that weren't corporate property were dead meat in this part of town, because there's really only one explanation why you would carry a cyber deck, which is the machinery that allows you to run through the matrix very quickly and powerfully. It's because you're planning on stealing something. Or sabotaging something. Dodger flipped open a panel next to the keypad. Pulling the cable free, he snapped the plug into his jack. As his fingers began to fly over the keys, his eyes rolled back in his head. Focused toward the vision of cyberspace, as the vision of cyberspace filled his mind. The tap-tap of the keys floated out into the night. Seconds stretched into minutes, and the minutes started piling up. This was taking too long. The court patrols wouldn't leave them alone forever. Sally's chromed nails rang on the station's aluminum rim. "Hurry," she chanted. "Hurry! Hurry!" Light flooded the alley. Ghost almost breathed a sigh of relief as he snatched his twin Ingrams from their holsters. The tension of waiting was almost over. He'd held his eagerness in check, waiting for the guards he could hear moving toward them. Dodger cursed as he jerked back from the terminal. The black shield whistled down, slicing his datajack cord and the prong lines as easily as it would have parted bone and flesh if his hand had been slower. Getting dumped had left him disoriented. Sally propped him against the wall. Ghost could see that the elf was still half lost in cyberspace, but he had no time for concern. The running footsteps were closing. Ghost smiled to himself as several dozen or so orcs rounded the corner of the warehouse. His reflexes were tuned so high that it almost seemed that Ghost fired at open air, the orcs somehow appearing just in time for the bullets to strike them. Screeching tires suddenly punctuated the scene as a security ground car appeared at the end of the valley. It was a corporate vehicle, and obviously armored. Mystic energies crackled at Sally's fingertips. And a ball of energy leaped at the car, blowing it in two and igniting the fuel tank like a bomb. The corporate goons froze in the white flash of the flame, to which Ghost's Chiba eyes instantly compensated. Putting a fourth and fifth burst of 9mm slugs into a temporarily blinded troll, he thanked himself for spending the extra bucks for flare compensation. So, again, Ghost is a street samurai, so he has cybernetic implants. He has wired reflexes, which allow him to have his reflexes so fast that he can react almost before his senses completely lock on something. He can fire in the space where something is going to be because his reflexes are so incredibly tuned. He also has cybernetic eyes, which he can bring up displays on at a command, and he can also automatically dampen bright glare, which nice to have if you're going to be working with flashbangs or if you're going to be working in a dynamic situation where cars can be blowing up. We also see how powerful Sally is. Throwing a fireball that can blow an armored corp car in two is rough. Not an easy thing at all. So Sally is definitely going to be a bit drained from that. The whole time, what's Dodger doing? Nothing. Getting dumped leaves you a mess. And his work has hopefully been done if he succeeded, but he's not contributing, and that is oftentimes one of the problems of being a decker is you don't shoot things. You are just there for the data, to do your job, to open up doors for other people, and if you do get to shoot something, it's usually with a puny little gun. Usually. Head for the bikes. I'll catch up. Ghost walked backwards, scanning the area and engaging targets. Sally grabbed the elf's arm and got him moving, while casting a look at Ghost, as though about to speak. "Beat feet, people," Ghost hissed, cutting off any protest. They began to move faster as the elf shook himself out of his stupor. Within moments, Sally and Dodger were legging it hard toward the alley where their bikes waited. Ghost scanned the scene one last time before he too turned and ran. What had taken over an hour to cover in stealth, they now moved across in minutes. Ghost knew it was inevitable that they would run into more trouble. While they were just a few hundred meters from their transportation, another security card appeared in front of them. Sally and the elf halted, their breath coming in short gasps. She began trying to put together another spell. "Save it," Ghost told her as he fished a grenade out of his pocket and yanked the pin. The car doors were opening and the bad guys getting out. As they did, Ghost tossed the grenade. His wired body seemed to pick out every detail as the sphere crossed the distance to its target. The spoon made a tiny metallic popping sound as it sprang free. Pretty white sparks made a trail as the Willy Peter bounced under the car. When the white phosphorus grenade blossomed into its full glory with a dull whump, Ghost chuckled softly. The car disintegrated in a cloud of debris, and bits of Toyota flew through the air. "See," Ghost said, smiling as he swung a leg over his bike. "You don't have to be a wizard to throw a fireball." Sally laughed and shook her head. "That's why I like working with you, Casper. It's always a blast." Dodger's words were drowned out as Ghost started his engine, and the three sped off into the night. So, that's a run. And some interesting things that it showed us. First of all, a little bit of the world. You know that there are big corporations, and they're scary, and they have almost limitless resources. But the Shadowrunners are frequently pitted against them in strike missions that try to hit them where they're vulnerable to get paid, to get valuable resources from them. You have a blending in culture of all these different angles. Obviously, even though he's Amerindian in his heritage, he strongly favors Japanese culture, wearing a hachimaki, using Japanese words filtered into his everyday expressions. The only thing he could have more is a katana, and yeah, there are katanas in this game, naturally. But he is a street samurai. He has cybernetics that make him superhumanly powerful. He has wire reflexes, we know, which are probably pretty good, considering he's able to take multiple turns and hit multiple targets with his Ingrams. Ingrams are nice submachine guns. They're a little underpowered when you're taking on bigger targets like trolls, so obviously he has a high skill to hit them where it hurts. But on its own, trolls often can kind of shrug off submachine gun fire, so obviously he's using either hot ammo or he's just really, really good. I suspect the latter. He's probably quite good. Sally herself is a very powerful mage. Clearly she knows her destruction spells. And that fireball, taking out a car, yeah, probably left her really drained, but mages can be quite powerful. And as far as going into the Matrix without a deck for the for the Dodger, that's some really gutsy stuff to do. Any intrusion countermeasures that you come across can kill you practically, because you don't have the comforting screen of having the cyber deck and all of its power and programs. It's just whatever you've got slotted into your head. That's dangerous, but they pulled it off. Whether Dodger got the information, we don't know. He might have, but he clearly wasn't happy about getting kicked out. His reflexes saved him from losing his hand, which is good, although the hands can be replaced. We have Sally didn't have to shoot at all. She just cast a spell and took out a car and the goons. Cars are usually a little bit more tough, especially security ones. Then can easily be taken out with a single grenade or a single spell, but for purposes of narrative license, it works just fine in this. These are experienced Shadowrunners, and common security isn't really a terrible difficulty. Now, more realistically, you probably have had a host of drones coming in on them, attack helicopters or something might have tried to thread into the city, or all kinds of magic could come up from, that's their headquarters after all, so there's probably a few wage mages in presence, but whatever reason, all the stars aligned to allow them to get in, try to do their job, and get out. Even though there were problems along the way, there was some combat to kind of show off what the atmosphere is like. If you have a run that feels like that, that's just a short bit of what a Shadowrun can really be. They didn't show a lot of other elements like the information gathering. Dodger, knowing the target, went to his contacts and he procured that key. But because of the paranoia of corporate security, they changed the passwords at midnight, so it would be only useful for that day. After that, it's garbage. So, they had a very limited time window. They talked about the stealth and how they were able to get by the corporations because they were skilled at being stealthy when they needed to be. They talked about being street savvy enough to do what they needed to do to protect their bikes. Again, not too much danger of crime from gangers in that time, in that period, but there's still people, there's still traffic, and there's dangers to that. They weren't locked up. They were, of course, probably secured, password secured, biometrics, what have you. So your average person probably wouldn't be able to steal one right away. But that's a danger that you have to face when you leave your stuff. So yes, all told, this is a nice little blueprint showing what the world feels like, what a Shadowrun feels like. It's tension, it's danger. And again, life is a bit cheap in the year 2050. These people just killed security guards for a major corporation. If they're identified, they could be in a lot of trouble. MCT doesn't sound like a corporation that backs away from going after the people who hurt them. And even if they didn't get away with what they were after, they killed personnel, they blew up corporate property, there's probably going to be a price on their head, or, you know, the corporation can field an army. So things could get kind of dangerous for them if they were caught. How did the decking go? It's another part of the dichotomy of the game, is a lot of times the people who are doing decking or rigging or astral combat and oversight can feel like they're not really part of the story. It's a little tough. I'm sure Dodger had all kinds of experiences and adventures inside cyberspace, and they can be wrapped up really, really quickly because your brain can go through distances through a network quite quickly. But all the same, very dangerous and very high stakes. He might have come away with a lot of information and data that wasn't their priority, too. He might have made quite a bit off of that run. We don't know. But if that's Mitsuhama's corporate office, probably a lot of really good stuff in there. So such a run would be nearly irresistible to people of any kind of pride as Shadowrunners. Dodger, clearly. Ghost, well, tied in with his obligations with Sally and his own personal code of honor. Yeah, that's worthy of his efforts, and Sally needed to do it. So, an interesting look into the world of Shadowrun. That story I've read numerous times, trying to get a sense of the feel of this world and what makes it tick. What makes it uniquely Shadowrun? How does Seattle of 2050 feel different from our world of today? Or, more realistically, our world of the 1990s when I was running Shadowrun First Edition. Now, again, we aren't going through any mechanics here. Perhaps I'll do a part 2 if you are interested in hearing more about how the mechanics work with their play examples. I could do that. But otherwise, I think I'm going to leave Shadowrun First Edition here, unless you want to hear more, because I think that's an excellent little slice of what life is like. You have an elf, you have a wizard, you have a warrior going up against corporate troops and trying to escape with the cash. It's a brilliant little story. So, of course, Shadowrun is a lot. It's a huge and expansive world. There are other races, trolls and orcs and dwarves, as well as elves and humans. You have a whole culture of setting up Shadowruns that you didn't see here. Who did Sally get her mission from? A Mr. Johnson, probably somebody from a rival corp who wanted to hire Shadowrunner to go and do what he needed to do, a very dangerous mission. But, obviously, she was paying off something very vital. There was a lot that went on behind the scenes that a group of Shadowrunners would want to do. More information gathering, more resource gathering, checking with your contacts, all kinds of good stuff. But, as far as a slice of the action, quite good. Quite good. So, hope you enjoyed this. I am Rob. This has been another Worlds Their Way, looking at Shadowrun First Edition. Thank you for joining me, and until next time, play games, have fun, stay safe. Farewell.